So this is Dusty Hill, and I am Peter Freeby. I started working with TabletopTown about, I think, 2018 is when I first started working with Mikkel on the idea, and then we had a pandemic, and we live across the country from each other, so we kind of got started there, and now it's a whole thing. Um, Dusty is incredibly well known for, um, I feel like for me, well known for the like particular kind of games that I give a shit about, specifically the ones where it's like you feel the stitching on like playing just a good fucking game that also has structure to it and like really sort of powerful storytelling options in a space that I think for me is like black box theater stuff, right? Of like the reason why I like black box theater is not because it's just small or low budget or something. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is being able to see a story sort of crafted in front of you. And I feel like I was just working with Built by the Architects with my partner earlier today at a coffee shop, and that's sort of the vibe that I was getting. But Dusty, if you want to sort of introduce yourself and describe kind of how you make games, I'd love to sort of see where I'm wrong.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for that. That's really cool to hear for someone that really enjoys just like tabletop games as a medium. But yes, hi, I'm Dusty. I use they, he pronouns. And I create games. I'm on podcasts. I love playing games. Tabletop games are my current just love right now. And yes, I've made Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, which is right behind me, but you can't tell. You just see the moons right there. Also, Dracula Owes You Money is another one that people constantly like talk about. I feel at least like talk about it to me, which is always surprising when someone says, "Oh, I've played your game." It's like, really? Um, Thank you, but really? And yeah, I did just release Built by the Architects, which is my current love letter to John Wick and also trading card games, because that's like the whole thesis of that one, where you use a deck of cards to try to emulate like both like chaotic and fast-paced storytelling and combat.
Yeah.
But yeah, like how I started getting into game design just by kind of talking to friends that've done it. Like my very first game is called Memoria, which is based off of well, it's not really based off of anything. It has vibes from like The Edge of Tomorrow, and like just general like sci-fi like time loop games. But I took ideas from playing Sleepaway and J Dragons like games where you have a deck of cards and the cards create prompts and you have tokens, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
And that was my first foray. It was definitely much more ambitious than I initially intended, but I still hold that game close to my heart. And Dracula Owes You Money started as a game jam. There was the BIPOC Vamp Game Jam 2020, 2021, one of those. And I was like, okay, let me make a game. And a lot of ideas I have just for general projects I work on um, are unfortunately just like, really quickly, I didn't ask this before. Can I cuss?
I mean, I cussed already a few times. So in
Okay,
this one,
so yes. Shit posts.
yeah.
Because Dracula Owes You Money, I was trying to figure out what to do. And then there is that screen cap from a Moon Knight comic that goes around all the time, where it's just Moon Knight saying, Dracula, give me my fucking money. Where are you, you fucking nerd? And a
Yeah.
game spawned from that.
Yeah.
And to figure it out, it's a honey heist hack. And I just
Mhm.
kind of went through, okay, like I had to figure out where to like how this game worked. So I played it and also went through these are the prompts. How do the prompts work with the character options, that kind of stuff. And that one was a very like quick and dirty game. I wrote that maybe in 2 days. Um, After going back and forth with some friends on like what the prompt should be. And then I wrote Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters because of a joke my friend said on the podcast. He's like, he was on a book writing podcast, and it's
Okay.
like sometimes the title just gets people. And it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, if you write something called Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, people are going to flock to it. I'm like, that's a good name.
Did it
And,
develop
and
more
so
than
I
that?
wrote the game.
Was the joke only that, and it like expanded a la for Sherlock Holmes and a Vampire, or was there more like um was there more material that you had to work with to be able to get it off the ground?
No, it was just that single line that my friend said.
Perfect.
Um, and I wrote it going into, it's like, okay, well, what's the idea of like if you're a lesbian werewolf and a crime fighter, like how is that going to work? And I just kind of spun off from there. Instead of trying to hack something, I just started like writing my own system. Like truthfully, it all came from I used a D8 in the game, and that was because like, okay, I want to use dice. What dice I'm going to use? And again, shit posts. I was like, okay, well, lesbians love going on dates. Everyone loves going on dates, but so do lesbians. So you use a D8. Um,
Oh, because it's
and
the word date.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I did mechanics first and then kind of went out from there. I added almost like playbook light if you do like a PBTA game, because you have like specialized moves that you choose that are very similar to like when you choose like the professional and monster of the week, you get a list of playbook moves. And so I did that, but it's like it's light because everyone has these choices. um
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and including the cover, it's 5 pages. So, like, I was looking through the structure of like which ones should I get into, and I got into Built by the Architects first, as like first in terms of prep for this,
mhm.
just because I was like, I love cards, and I want to like figure out more like what people want to do with cards.
Mhm, mhm.
And but Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, the fact that it's 4 pages and also like dense enough that it doesn't seem like, you look at a Honey Heists, or like Dracula Owes You Money, right?
Yeah.
Those structures. um I Do you feel like those structures, when you're working with something that's like a hack of something like Honey Heist, or working with something with the simplicity of Honey Heist, that you start accidentally boxing in with the kinds of stories that you can tell with it, or the kinds of meaning you can draw from it? What is that process like for you?
um I don't think that's necessarily true. I think when the idea for me for all those smaller like one page s games, I didn't put it all on one page because Grant Howitt, fantastic designer. I i can't i wouldn't want to submit people to trying to read my handwriting squeezed on one page. And I like it to be at least a little readable. So that's why I went with like a page and a half or 2 pages.
Yeah.
Um, but I just like Honey Heist, it's very much a game designs like everyone could sit down, make characters in 15-20 minutes, and then you could play like a 2 hour game. Like if you wanted to meet friends at like a local game store or just even like a game night on the local Discord. But that doesn't necessarily limit like the kind of options you have like for storytelling. Because I place a huge emphasis on using games to tell all kinds of stories, whether you just want to do a comedy, whether you want to do just um deep analysis of both like your gender and its relation to the world around you.
Yeah.
Which is a lot to do in Dracula Owes You Money, but I reopened them and looked at the stuff. Like your character, you are like a teenager that your role is an engineer, but your day job is, I don't know, your work a bartender, which that doesn't necessarily work, but we're throwing stuff out the window. And then you have to figure out, okay, you're doing all this, you're obviously very busy, but like why are you fighting Dracula? Why are you trying to find them? and I could go into very deep like feelings, though that doesn't necessarily mean that every game will be like that. I know one of the comments that I got on my itch was like, "This was so fun." Dracula was like a DJ at like a rundown like pizza place, and they took like all the person's like I don't even remember, but it's like it also builds where you could have these serious conversations, but you have also all this levity. If this Dracula is doing a monologue of like saying like you weren't worth all this, that's why I took it, but they're dressed with like 90s DJ like light up necklaces, like you're not gonna take them serious. And sometimes that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. It's the old quote of comedy as a way of saying something very serious in a light way, or whatever that quote is, right? That there's weight within that comedy too, right? I think, you know, one of my favorite games, at least with TabletopTown that I've been working with, has been Moonlight on Roosevelt Beach, which I think has a similar like exploring or getting generally fucky with like gender and sexuality in a way that's both entertaining and also like can hit pretty hard. And I think like with Moonlight on Roosevelt Beach, because of the structure of how that game was made, it has to be really carefully produced, right? Because it's using public domain material. And so with public domain material, you don't have a lot of great visual representation of different identities, right? Because of how public domain works and its history and the structure behind all that. Do you feel like when you're building stuff that has that, or that you want to potentially include weight, do you have to be intentional with it, or like how do you think about that sort of rule set for yourself when you're making stuff?
I think I try to strike a balance for because at least I guess like all my games, because Built by Architects also has all these options you could choose from.
Yeah.
But like Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, um, like one of the first things that I put, which I knew like initially may cause like people to be upset with a simple sentence, is you're a lesbian, you're a werewolf, you're a crime fighter. You start off as a lesbian, pick your pronouns. And just that right there, I knew that simple sentence could get people upset.
Right.
Because there's so much thing against gender identity, against like just like you could be like a she they lesbian, a he they lesbian, that kind of stuff. But it's like including little things like that will add like added depth and let people tell these kind of stories. And also like the options, like one of the options for what are you protecting the city against is dinosaurs with rockets strapped to their backs. Which is this whole thing, but the other one is literally like an overstepping government, which I wrote this earlier this year, late last year, and that was very relevant, and unfortunately still is very relevant. But so it's like adding those levities and giving people both the choice and the tools to tell these kind of story, because all our games are basically just you're giving tools to tell a story, whether it's a story you ever thought you would tell. It may not be, but it could be something that may become your favorite story.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good segue actually then for me to ask, both in terms of mechanics and in terms of just narrative. What are your favorite stories right now? Like what are you vibing with?
So right now, I take a lot of inspiration from media, as you could tell, John Wick, which has gone to like I finished Built by the Architects with this card-based system, and now I'm trying to gonna hack that system because my current favorite story right now is from Armored Core 6, the newest FromSoft video game about giant mechs. Which really goes much more in depth to like the idea of identity, the idea of what is being a person actually mean, and how that entails with your environment as a whole.
Mhm.
Um, and so my favorite stories are kind of like that, dealing with what it means to be.
Mhm.
Um, the other the other side of that coin is revolutionary stories,
Mhm.
fighting against whether it be fascistic leaders, just fighting against like what's right, like Andor.
Oh,
Andor itself inspired a whole podcast for me that I started running. And it's a common theme of the stories I like to tell as well, is being someone that is fighting against like an overstepping and overarching enemy, a government, a regime, what have you, because not only it's something that they are against you, but it's also just it's against everything that you are, which is that stepping all the way back. That's just stemming from how it feels to be queer in the US right now.
yeah.
Queer, non-binary, trans, including like I'm Mexican, I'm Latine. Um, all these identities is just currently constantly under duress by the world at large. And being able to tell a story where you're with like-minded people fighting against this is sometimes just like really nice. Like it allows you to like breathe and just like not worry about having to think about every word you say.
Yeah.
That went on a tangent, but yeah.
No, that's perfect. I mean, I think like there's something particular, I think, about within that context, like what making is, right? Like the both in terms of like there's tons and tons of safety concerns about like the process of making when the things that you are making uh, inherently are going to have the grooves of your experience sort of baked and pressed into them, right? So I think like I'd just love to know when you're thinking about that, what is the what's the environment where you're able to make stuff just because that's what you do versus, and this is a really abstract question, so I can restructure it if need
Mhm,
be,
mhm.
but versus like being able to be a lot more intentional in terms of what those grooves look like what is the environment for you where you think about those different kinds of making games or making stories.
Um, so it really depends for me. For making stories, like I'm on a ton of podcasts because I like doing these stories with my friends, are just like going out with the intention to make a story. But it depends what story you kind of do. One group, just because we are not all like on the same page, and that's like not for like any bad reasons. Just some of us don't want to tell this kind of story, and that's okay.
Right.
Like we're still on the same page in other stuff, telling a different story. But I mean, for instance, Unwavering Force, the Star Wars podcast I do,
Mhm.
that story is very much centered around being someone constantly under duress,
Mhm.
and both a combination of just trying to survive, but also fighting fighting things so you could strive.
Mhm.
And that had to be a very intentional choice of who I'm working with, very intentional choice of like the theme, the vibe of just like how we're going throughout the story. Um, and that includes just like everyone being upfront about stuff, explaining like, hey, I want to go a little more deeper into something that could be a little stressful, could be a lot stressful. And if everyone is on the same page for that, then a story could like really thrive. But it takes a lot of intentional planning to get there. Um,
I mean, like,
and
how do you? Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
How do you think about maybe this is just a me problem, but I think when I'm thinking about playing a game where I'm like really interested in expressing like a particular weighty topic or exploring a particular weighty topic, that um, the idea of being able to say, I think this is important to be included here, being able to identify when that transition point happens, that like I think this would be right for this story, is like feels almost impossible sometimes, right? Where you're just sort of thinking about something and you're like, maybe this is just me internally, or maybe this is like the vibe for this. Is there
Mhm.
setup that you do to be able to like make that run smoothly?
Um, I've had moments like this where I really wanted to tell a very specific kind of story, and that usually ends up with me either running the game or running the story. But sometimes I have like spoken to people, and we happen to be like on the same page, or like explain like, "Hey, I want to do this," and the other person was like, "Okay, that's like a very interesting like way to bring the story. Let's figure out how we could maneuver in that way." But again, that kind of like you'd have to be on the same brainwave, like almost 100%.
Mhm.
But that also could be just choosing the way you want to tell the story, like the game you want to tell the story with.
Yeah.
Um, if I wanted to tell a story of, let's just say, being a queer person fighting like a fascist government, that again, it's always on the brain. I don't know why. You could say. Uh, I would maybe do something like, I mean, even Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, like my own game. But also like I would look at something like one thing that just top of my head, like Lancer. Like Lancer is a system, a world setting that you are in a world controlled by corporate people trying to use you as tools.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of I think it's a combination of both like having the right group or finding the right medium for it, and also finding the right game, or I guess just general medium. I guess games are a medium as well. So it a lot of things would have to line up. It's not like always something, because like sometimes just even going on your own and trying to tell like this very intensive story could also just be like mentally exhausting.
Right. Like just the amount of effort required to be able to tell the story, even if you want to, is sometimes like if you're going to do it well, it takes a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, do you mind if I transition to something just a little bit lighter? Because I feel like I'm just hammering you on. So, what's the core identity that you have, and how do you form it, and all of that? But I wanted to ask a little bit about goblets and gays, and also like the sort of podcasting world mixed with like, um, the way that you choose the games that you play. Because you're mentioning Lancer, you're mentioning all kinds of stuff that's not the big corporation one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about like, I'm looking right now at an episode count for goblets and gays.
Yeah, it's a
It's a
long
high
one.
number. Is it 37 episodes total, or 37 episodes just this season out of 4 seasons?
I
Then all
think
the way down the track.
for season 4, I think we're on episode 37 released. Yes. Yeah. It
When and each one of these is at least an hour.
yes,
That's
yeah, yeah.
you're putting up friends at the table numbers right there. Uh, what's the what's the process for like committing to something at that scope, especially with that number? Were you playing anyway, and you've got microphones, and you might as well, or what's the vibe?
So Goblins and Caves actually I did not join until like season 3. But I was friends with the cast since the first season. And from my
Right.
understanding with them, the rest of the group already was playing in the game together,
Yeah.
and then just like, hey, the pandemic started. We all have to be at our desks anyways. Do you want to start a podcast? And I, as a fan, listened to all of season one, loved it. Going back now, quality a little rough. It's a little rough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because the
That's how
group,
it is. Right?
yeah, the group, we were all learning at that time. Like I started doing podcasts around that time as well, but also same deal. We're all learning.
Yeah.
And then like they jumped up to like season three, like early on. Like I've already guested on the show a few times. Because again, like I'm just friends with the cast. We all like-minded for the most part. And then someone's like had to leave for personal reasons, and so they asked me, like, "Hey, we're telling this story. This is the direction that it's going. I know you've already been part of it. Would you be free to take up every Sunday evening, more or less, for like an undetermined amount of time to help finish the story?" And I, of course, said yes.
But that was season 3. You're in season 4 now. So
Yes. And season 3 is long, and those are actually longer episodes. Because we're still growing as a show. Where we are at season 4 now, we do about hour and a half compared to 3-hour episodes, which is just like a lot to edit all at once. I commend Aubrey for doing all that editing.
are you how much editing is it? Because I know with some of those, it's like as long as you pair up your audio tracks so that they're in sync with one another, and you've got your bumpers on the end, and maybe a commercial break if you want to put in the effort for that stuff, then it works out. But some people go in, they listen through the whole thing, and they clip the great stuff. Is that what you guys are doing?
So, Aubrey's editing is very similar to mine.
Yeah.
She goes through, we record usually hour and a half segments now, but previously it would be 3 hours. We take like a break in there sometimes. And a lot of the editing is just cleaning up, just like sometimes. Not as much anymore, just because it's at this point it's part of how the person talks, and you're gonna just keep that in. But it's also paring down tangents, paring down just like blocks of silence when someone's trying to make a decision, making sure everyone sounds like they know what they're doing when we're doing combat. Where like a 2-minute turn gets cut down to 30 seconds because you just cut out all the back and forth. Which, funnily enough, all those things like the tangents that cut out just go into a blooper reel that we do, which is like a whole other piece of editing.
Yeah, you just created more work for yourself.
Exactly. And then now Aubrey and I as well, we go through and not only do all that stuff, but we add backing music. Sometimes we put filters on voices. Sometimes we add effects, which can easily turn an hour and a half piece of audio into about 5 hours of work. Yeah, it's a lot, but it's something that we both love doing.
Yeah, if it's what you're doing, that's what you're doing, right? Had you played Pathfinder before the podcast?
Yes, yeah, actually, Pathfinder
Nice.
actually was my first TTRPG.
Yeah.
And then second edition came out, played that for a year or two until I joined the show.
Nice. So I guess I wanted to switch over a little bit to the mechanical side of games here. So we've been talking about dice, we've been talking about cards a little bit. I know that some people, there's a handful of games that use, your Minesweeper results, and if you're playing Jenga, like using that as a randomizer, right? What are you sort of enamored with right now that isn't a D20?
So right now, I think right now I'm really about cards, because I've done so much like playtesting and like idealizing the mechanics for Built by the Architects. And I've just always been into trading card games, whether it be like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Magic, like Flesh and Blood, any of the above, um, and figuring out what you could do with cards, because that was introduced to me super early on. Again, like Sleepaway, you use a deck of cards, they're prompts, you follow that. Memoria uses cards. I played something else recently that uses tarot cards. I have a friend, E Ferris Games. She wrote Onata Nox, which is like a very like Bloodborne inspired game, and you
Mm.
use tarot cards for all the mechanics,
That's
which
so good.
is which is just a super interesting mechanic to deal with. And what I'm really trying to figure out and bring in is um, Built by Architects uses a deck of cards as if you're playing a trading card game. You have a hand, you play those cards, you have things that either do conditions or change like the state of play between you or the opponent. It's a two-player game as is. Um, and with this idea I have formed that is, I would say, like maybe 90% polished. I want to go in and do some more playtesting for it. I want to change that into a deck building version of it, because like the game is already inspired by Slay the Spire
Mhm.
and other stuff like this. There's this board game called Aeon's End that is a whole thing. There's a marketplace. You put it, but it's a deck building game where you use these cards. And I think that translated into like you're building this thing and then narratively this is what you have to play with. Sounds super fun. Um I was recently at Big Bad Con and someone said the term mechanic sicko, and I was like, oh, that's me. That's me.
Yeah,
I'm the mechanic sicko.
yeah.
And yeah, and I feel like deck building in itself is like high up on like sicko levels in general.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I played Hearthstone years and years ago. It was actually
Mhm.
getting married. I got so stressed out. I pulled out Hearthstone on my phone and like forced my best man, who's also now a co-founder with the company, to uh, play a game of Hearthstone over Wi-Fi with me, and it like leveled me out. So the mechanic sicko specifically with deck building, I 100% relate to, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I wanted to just really quick read some of my favorite parts from the Built by Architects that's related to this, like card
Uh-huh.
based sort of narrative storytelling, because I
Okay.
think it's such an incredible way to like use mechanics to describe story. So like in this, you're doing sort of could you actually do you mind describing like what does the sort of combat structure, how does combat work in Built by Architects or Built by the Architects?
Yeah, yeah. So the combat for that works. I went back and forth and like waffled on this a bit to try to figure out what would work best. And I decided to go kind of like on the round system almost.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever played Flesh and Blood is a trading card game. It's made by someone who used to make Magic. And my friends and I lovingly call it the Dark Souls of trading card games because it emulates one-on-one combat very well. And that was my big inspiration for it. So basically when combat starts, you may have had cards in your hand narratively, you shuffle it, everyone gets a fresh hand of cards. And basically one player puts a card down, say it's like an 8 of clubs, which I think clubs I have as the deadliness stat in Built by the Architects.
Mm-hmm.
And like narratively, okay, 8 of clubs down, someone is coming at you with like a heavy shotgun. And
Mm-hmm.
then your the other player's turn is to react to that using your cards. Like, okay, so they have an 8 of clubs, they're coming out with me a shotgun. I need to either get an 8 in total or beat it with my other cards. And I could either be narratively or just like me scrambling for my life. And so there's one where you play like a 10 of spades. Spades is focus, I believe. And I think that would just be like, okay, 10 of spades, I beat you, I've overcome that. So I am able to weave around you, get up in and disarm you. And then that's like one part of it. but before everyone draws again, the other player then does their move. And you could play as many cards as you like, but you kind of have to figure out, okay, like if I attack with these two cards, I have to make sure I have stuff to defend when they attack me back before a round ends. And basically, each round, one person like quote unquote wins, and it's like best 2 out of 3. And it's the idea of it is you want to try it to be fast paced, you want to try to be stressful because all the combat in John Wick is fast paced and stressful.
It gives me I can't remember what the name of the game is, but in childhood I used to there was this game, I think it was called Slap 5 or something like that, where you put down a card and you have to slap the other person's hand.
I think that's like the kids version of War.
So it wasn't War though, because you had to like, it was like it was like some sort of multiplayer version of Solitaire. Maybe my mom just invented it or something.
It's possible.
Okay. But there's this kind of urgency with cards that I think is really actually hard to get across with dice somehow, that like, because it's so dramatic, putting down the card, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that then turns into with these conditions specifically, and I've got my face off to the side again, so I need to move that out. The thing with these conditions is it's like this bridge between the reality of what you're playing in the physics of putting a card down in real meat space and the narrative of what's happening in the game, right? So if you get the severe conditions are my favorite. I just want to read a couple of these. If your character is restrained, you cannot play cards next turn, lasts 1 round, because you're physically restrained, right? If you're very wounded, you must show your hand to the opponent. You must show their hand to the opponent, lasts 2 rounds. So it's like the metaphor that we use of like, you got to show your hand, like they've shown their hand at this point in like a narrative tension structure, is actually mechanically happening in front of you while you're playing the game. It's such an incredible way to like Pathfinder's very good at this. This game is really good at this, of like using the mechanics as a narrative object. I think like when you're thinking about, this is the game that I make, right? I make these kinds of games, or I make this particular vibe. What do you think the thing that you make as like the thing that you're known for, or that you will be known for, or however you want to think about that? What do you think that looks like? What's your tool set?
I think initially I'm known for either fighting cryptids or being cryptids fighting things, because that just ends up how a lot of my games are.
Yeah.
I like to think I really like putting narrative stress on mechanics, because like mechanics are just, they're the cogs of like the storytelling wheel. And if you could have really cool mechanics but like not have them connect whatsoever to what's happening, and that kind of like that, I think that could kind of hurt a game, because there's like games where like you use like the dice in a very specific way, but like narratively when I have to do a dice roll, I'm just like, it's a fail or pass, and that's just kind of like, okay, that loses a lot of like tension. The story isn't necessarily moving because of this role. I like making roles are like moves progress the narrative as much as possible. Like I know for Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters, I think I named it your tenacity for like your quote unquote health pool, but your tenacity is both your health pool but it's also a resource for your moves.
Mhm.
And using that, it's like, okay, like I want to use this move I have. It's going to take away 3 of my tenacity, which means that I'm in much more danger. But it also means I'm doing something that could propel the fight, propel the story, propel like this scene forward because it's using all these resources. And that's kind of where I like to keep my game design like focus on, because the marriage of narrative mechanics just means you have a good
Yeah.
story.
It's that there's like a building synthesis there, right? Because games can take, multiple hours, or if you're playing with Tabletop Town, they could go on forever and you never have to leave. But because of that, right, I think that there's this temptation to, I think, do the same thing people do with video games, to like get the most you can out of the first 5 minutes when you open the game, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
that like it's so hard because if you're designing the game, you want people to play it, right? So the goal of trying to get that hook in early is really tempting, but also it can potentially make it more difficult in the long run to be able to get those bigger, more satisfying sort of hooks later on that are like, oh shit, we we got it. It's all coming together. The mechanics and the story have built up just to this exact point, right? Like, that's what people really like. I think a lot of the sort of podcasts for that got them into tabletop role playing games in the first place, right? Like, if you think about Taz Balance, if you ever listen to the Adventure Zone, or
Mm-hmm.
Critical Role, like you can't deliver the crescendo moments at the very beginning almost at all, right? You can't have
Mm-hmm.
any kind of structure like that without like pretty strong hooks, that are sort of laid throughout. Um, Switching gears just a little bit, I wanted to ask you about speaking of Tabletop Town, what's we're trying to do this thing that's like asynchronous play. You play on your phone, you can play it with chat. Did you ever do play by post stuff like way back when, or did you ever do those kinds of games?
I didn't really do it like games way back when.
Yeah.
Um, Funny enough, one of my first like narrative, just like role playing, like story beat stuff
Mhm.
was, this is going to tell a lot about me in a few short sentences.
Okay.
I ran a Night Vale roleplay account
Yes.
where me and some other people who were also doing RP would basically like, hey, I'm going to start a post and tag this other person
Mhm.
and just basically wait for them to reply, which in and itself is kind of like a game as is.
Yeah.
But that was my first like initiation into just like the idea of doing this kind of role play.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you feel like there's a particular kind of gameplay that you got out of that? That's not like, it's a social experiment, right? That kind of RP more than like the mechanics heavy stuff that you've been talking about. But do you feel like
mhm.
there's an advantage that you found in terms of the kinds of stories that you're telling using that kind of check in when you have time kind of structure?
I think it just kind of allowed you to take your time and trying to figure out exactly what you wanted to say. Because
Yeah.
like a lot of those like posts would actually start in like DMs with each other. It's like, hey, what if we did blank? Like, oh no, someone's gonna get lost in the dog park. A totally normal sentence in any other context. It's like then you start that post.
Yeah.
The other person replies, and like then you have to think, okay, like I see what they're trying to set up. Do
Mhm.
I? And you have to either decide like, do I want to go with that? Do I want to maybe like play within the kind of vibe you want to do, but subvert expectations?
Mhm.
And it just depends, like like at any table, who you're playing with, and it's like okay, like do you think they'll enjoy this? Will they not? And you can always like And that's the thing with play by post as well. You could always like reverse things. And I mean, if you're using safety tools, you could do that in a regular game as well. But yeah, I think that's the advantage of doing the play by post, role play by post back then.
Mhm.
Um, I think I just haven't done it now because I'm already like now I'm a bad texter as is.
Yeah,
So like I feel like I would leave people on red for too long and then forget what was going on.
that's so funny. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I think like I'm looking at the games that you've made, and I I keep wanting to play more things like Honey Heist on Tabletop Town, because stuff that's like lightweight, you can get it in your head and like play without having to be like, okay, where's the rules? Where's that stuff? Being able to sort of digest it really quickly and explore a lot of different kinds of stories is really great that way. But yeah, I guess Blair, if you wouldn't mind, are we set until 6:30 or 6:15, or am I over or under time? I'm not sure. Okay, cool. Um, okay, cool. Well, I guess I wanted to sort of explore then with you. Um, what are you working on now? Are you working on any games right now?
So right now I'm in the very early phases of this mecha game idea I've had.
Yeah.
Because I really something that I really enjoyed doing for Built by the Architects is that like I more or less made a world for that.
Mhm.
That like each like architect is your assassin. There's pillars there. The pillars are part of a pantheon. The pantheon does this. That was like really fun. I didn't really get to do that often. And so I'm very early in writing like the overall world for this mecha inspired thing. It's going to be heavily inspired by Armored Core 6, but I'm going to do my best to not just like take everything and just name it something else, as you do. Um,
Yeah.
but besides that, I'm working. Uh, it's not announced yet, but I'm working on like writing some playbooks for a friend's game. That'll probably be out. The idea is by Halloween, I believe. It's that kind of like spooky like
Ooh,
vibe.
yeah.
Um, but besides that, those are my big like game work. Um, and then like I'm doing mostly podcasts right now,
Mhm.
which for my Star Wars podcast, it's a lot of homebrew because we're actually using Pathfinder 2e. Um,
Oh, okay. You're not doing the Star Wars official game?
no, I have a lot of beef with the game.
Even the old one? Did you ever play that old one?
I personally didn't play the old one, but I have a lot of friends that have.
That
Um,
old one was actually that was my first tabletop role playing game I ever played. So
the Fantasy Flight, like the older editions,
yeah, yeah.
or
The
different.
the,
Yeah,
the first one that has, the 1980s like poster art as the cover for it.
yeah, yeah. I narratively
Mhm.
I liked it, but for what we were trying to do, it would have been like we would have to be pulling from like two different rule sets to do in one thing because of like the story we wanted to tell.
Yeah.
Um, and we all decided, well, Pathfinder 2e has a really good way of making very diverse and also powerful characters.
Mhm.
So we'll do that and we'll just flavor and homebrew the rest, which
Gotcha.
honestly has been going pretty good.
Yeah. Did you incorporate or think about incorporating Starfinder into that at all?
I have a little bit.
Okay.
My life is going to be so much easier and better when the second edition comes out because Starfinder second edition, Pathfinder second edition are same rule sets, different like lore and stuff.
Yeah.
I've already stolen a couple things because like Pathfinder has been like secretly inserting a couple things here and there. Like there's already rule sets for Android. There's
Yeah.
already like weapons and like battery operated things as is. So
Mhm.
I've taken some, converted to some more, and then homebrewed the rest.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's also people talk about using SW5E, which I think is what Brandon Lee Mulligan ended up using for a season or two back. But have you ever touched 5E?
I did 5e
Yeah.
for a little bit. I had a home game. We started with Pathfinder 1e. Then when Curse of Strahd came out, my friend ran it for us.
Oh yeah,
Um,
sure.
very very fun experience. It was
Mhm.
short. We got to like level 5, and that was it.
Yeah.
And then pre-pandemic, like from mid 2019 to the
Mhm.
end of the year, basically, I ran like a teen program at my local library of 5e, which would be like a weekly thing where people could come in. It would either be like a jump in game, make characters, or like a quote unquote ongoing thing. Um,
That's great.
which it was fun. Like it was also very chaotic. At one
How
point,
what was the age range that you had?
it's the teen program, which
Yeah.
basically meant anyone from uh 8 years to 17. So I once had that range, and once the we had like someone's father came in. It's like, hey, like I really wanted to show them this game. I heard you're playing with it. Could I like sit in with them? And like our librarian and I was like, fine. Which ended up being that was a 10-person table for a 2 hour 5e game,
Wow.
which
That's
basically meant like everyone introduced themselves. All right, roll initiative.
yeah, that's great. It's so funny. I mean, it makes a lot of sense leaning more towards the Pathfinder if you're like deep into mechanics as a person. That makes a lot more sense, right?
Yeah,
The sort
yeah.
of mechanical complexity integrated with narrative. It's the bread and butter of Pathfinder, baby,
It
right?
is. It is. Yeah. I'm just
Um,
not like a 5e person anymore. Let's be real.
I mean, it's tough. It's tough to be. All right. So I think that we maybe coming to the end here, but are there any other things that you wanted to sort of talk through? I'm open to talk as long as you want, but did you have stuff that you wanted to discuss?
Nothing comes like at the top of my head. One thing,
Sure.
like if anyone's watching, if you played my games, I'd love to hear about them. That's like one thing that every time I hear someone like plays my games, I'm like, that's really cool. I want to hear what you thought about them.
Yeah.
Like just sharing the link for this, someone in a public server I'm in is like, oh, you wrote Dracula owes you money. I'm like, yeah, you know about Dracula owes you money.
Yeah. It's so funny. I feel like that is how names are made in on itch.io. It's not the magnum opus that tells the best story and has the best game mechanics. It's the side projects and the smaller ones that you run as a part of the game jam, and because it's in a game jam it gets into the thing, right? So it gets
Mhm,
into the
mhm, mhm.
ecosystem. That's great. um, well, it was so incredible having you on. um, I I hope to God that you are interested in getting at least Dracula owes you money onto Tabletop Town, so I can start playing it with the meager time off that I have while trying to get this thing off the ground. But
I'm actually like 80% of the way of putting Lesbian Werewolf Crimefighters on there. I just need to import everything and make sure like it gets through all like it took me just a minute to figure out how to put the things where like they
mhm.
are in the system. Like, oh, okay, like it's actually fairly intuitive. I'm glad I don't have to code. Coding is my worst nightmare.
Have you had to before? Have you tried to integrate stuff onto Roll20 or
I
whatever you have
I
to?
yes, I have, and I did not enjoy it whatsoever. My partner is so much better at it, and I just go like, "Hey, can I get some help, please?"
Yeah. I mean, as a designer, I'm so used to the square spacification of a lot of these kinds of things that, like, when I first started playing with Roll20 and stuff, and or Foundry or whatever, and I was like, okay, how do I make it look like what I want it to look like? I was like, oh wow, So that was sort of the jumping off point for this, right? You know,
Yeah.
low stakes, but yeah, you can theoretically make any one of your games with the exception of cards. We're working on the cards. This is part of why I ask you about the cards, is because when we get it out, I want to make sure it's done right. So
Yeah, once you have the cards, I would love to put Memoria on here because
yeah,
Memoria definitely feels like a step away kind of game because that one's a little more intense than my other games. I
yeah.
put like prompts in there that are just like definitely meant to like hit you in the heart and make you take a second.
Yeah, that's perfect. I hadn't really thought about that being that's the sort of core loop, right? Of like making it so that you can get hit and take a beat, you know, while
Mhm.
playing these games. So that's a great way to think about what kinds of games are really good on this platform. But enough platform talk. I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. People should play Dracula Owes You Money. People should play all of your games. And is there a final shout out that you want to give for like where people should find you?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm usually at Dusty Hill everywhere.
Mhm.
I'm actually by next week I may have a different name for like all my games, like a ensign for it. It's in the work, but you currently find it at Dusty Hill. I have a link tree that's at Dusty Hill. That's DUSTEHILL.
Mhm.
Also, I realized when looking at this, there was no community copies for either Dracula Osmini or Lesbian Werewolf Crime Fighters. So I just added a bunch on there. So if you wanted to check it out, again, I just want to hear people play my games and talk about it.
Yeah. All right. With that, I'm gonna end it. Well, actually, Blair's gonna end it. It won't be me. Thank you. Goodbye. We have to say goodbye
Bye.
to everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye,